Hey, Paul.
Hey Fab,
How are you?
good. You?
Good. Last show of 2022.
Yes.
How's it feel? I don't know. We've been doing this for 4 years now. Three
I don't
years?
know. I forget what year it is now. 2019,
Um,
2020. It's all the same.
yeah.
So much fun. Time flies. So.
Yeah. So all that being said, this show is probably going to be posted in the new year, so in 2023. So I think it's a very timely topic because although uh, it's usually the beginning of the end of the year, beginning of years are usually times when sales leaders kind of reevaluate their teams, make sure they have the right players in place. If they don't have the right players, they need to recruit people. If they need to unfortunately let go of people and stuff like that. So one question that you encounter regularly, and I've heard also a lot, is expertise. So, do salespeople need to be experts in the products they sell, or how much expertise does a salesperson need to have in the product they sell? I think that's something a lot of leaders question, right? And we've all heard it, right? Like, oh, well, we sell IT solutions, so I need to find an IT expert to sell this, or I sell, paralegal services, so I need I'm not gonna hire a lawyer, but I need maybe some paralegals to do the selling. Or I sell accounting software, so I speak to accountants, so I need accountants, people with accounting backgrounds to sell, so they can speak to them. And what we're going to try to do is answer that question, obviously. So as a sales leader, what are you expecting your salespeople to do in terms of product expertise?
So that's a great question. So there's two ways of approaching it. So let's say you're a company, you're looking for someone, you're looking for some, or you're establishing a company, and it's a product that requires some expertise to implement. You need to ask yourself seriously, are you pushing a product, or is your product solving a problem? So that's the
Mm,
first question. And your salespeople, before being any kind of expert in the product, need to be consultative, communicative, and be able to find out what the client objectives are. So if your rep doesn't have that, then your representative won't be able to sell no matter how much of an expert he is or she
mm,
is, right? Because they're not taking the time to figure out the objectives. Now, that we know, right? We've talked about this a lot. But what some people wonder is like, well, won't it be easier if my guy knows everything about our product and can, really has the expert solution? Well, there's two ways of looking at that, right? It can be dangerous because if your guy goes into a ramble on solution based pitch, 3 seconds after he's talking to the client, doesn't matter how much of an expert he is, he's not being consultative. He's trying to treat it as a transaction. And that's a worry. So
mhm,
for me, do salespeople have to have expertise in the products they sell if it's a really complex product? The answer is no. And the answer is no, because if you have an expert back at the office or someone who can support the solution you're going to present, it's probably the best situation. And often it'll impede the conversation because that expert wants to just push his solution. Whereas a
mm,
good salesperson takes the time to really ask the questions of what the challenge is disabling the client to do, or what the opportunity would enable the client to do. And sometimes when you have the expertise, you just want to jump in on it. I'll give you a very practical example. Let's say you walk into the doctor, you say you've got a sore finger. Oh, I've seen sore fingers a lot. You have this, that, and we're going to fix it. And then let's say that doctor doesn't ask any questions. Well, that's what some salespeople act like. I've seen
mm,
sore fingers. These are all the solutions, whereas they don't find out what really is the cause of the sore finger and why they want to fix the sore finger. I don't know if that's a good analogy,
mm.
but there you go. So
Yeah,
what's your take on this?
yeah. I mean, you're right. Like, I think, and we've all seen this, and whether you're hiring an expert or you're putting a lot of money in product training, we've seen this a lot, where it's like sales leaders feel their sales team has to know the product inside out to be able to sell it, and invariably it can become an Achilles heel, where it's, you're in a conversation, and the second you hear product review, oh, we do product reviews, boom, this is what I'm hooking on to, right?
Yeah,
Or pipeline management, well, we have a CRM component, so this is actually what we do. Or account collectible, oh, well, we have automated reminders, so that helps collectibles or whatever, collecting revenue. So I think you're right. Product expertise can be a dangerous Achilles heel. I don't think it can necessarily. It has to be a negative, but it can definitely be a trick, right? So, I mean, I think you can have great product experts that are also great consultative sellers, uh, and obviously, I don't think we're saying your salespeople have to know nothing about your product, right? You want to be able to know enough about your product to be able to as you're disqualifying your people through your sales process to see whether what you're going to offer at the end of the day is actually solving their solution. Um, but you're right. I don't believe that product expertise is an absolute necessity. And as you mentioned, when there's a complex product, there's usually some sort of a engineering expertise team that'll come in and you know you're the salesperson, you're in charge of the sale, like you're collecting all the information, all the pains and the needs and the impact that all this is having on the company, and then you're packaging it all, then you're sitting with your sales engineer or whatever to build the solution and whatnot. Like there's usually an expert in there when a high degree of expertise is required. So I agree with you. I don't think expertise is an absolute must, and I think it's sometimes. I like what you said offline before we started. Like it can be a veil, right? Like
Yeah.
it could be like, oh, I'm training my team, like they know the product inside out. But so on that note, as a sales leader, then what should I do if we agree that sales people don't need to be experts? What should a sales leader do?
What should they be looking for, right? Or what do you mean? So okay, so what should they do? So when they're hiring people, they should be looking for the strengths of salespeople, not
Yeah,
of the expert, right? Particularly if they
yeah,
have experts in house. But here, one thing I'd like to say before we go there is that I've seen this so many times. They take, oh, this guy knows everything about our product. He's really good at it, and then you put him in a room in front of a bunch of clients, potential clients, and it goes nowhere
yeah,
because that person doesn't connect. The most
yeah.
important, and we've said this a million times, but the most important uh, behavior or quality that you want in a representative is the capacity to communicate and understand the client's desires, needs, and motivations.
Right.
And being an expert in your product does not guarantee that at all. If anything, like you said, or like I apparently said, it's a veil. It's a
Yeah,
veil that could be dangerous. So
yeah,
what do you do? Well, you need to make sure that when you're hiring your people, that you're basing it on what will help you create that communication. Now, I've seen so many companies, particularly companies with complex products, give all this product training and then they send their reps out there. Well, what does that do? So here I'm a rep. My company's spending a ton of time giving me product training. What are you going to start doing? You're going to start talking about the product because you just had a 4-hour session the day before or a 3-week session and you learn everything about the machine, right? So then, but in a B2B world, 99% of the time, the person you're selling to doesn't give a crap about your machine. They don't
right.
give a crap about your solution even. What they want is, hey man, does your solution fix my problem?
Yeah,
And what they do often in these worlds is that they see their B2B product like a B2C product. They're like,
yeah,
oh, this is shiny, it's exciting. Because a B2C product, when you're buying a guitar, I do care about how pretty it is and how nice it is. And I'm not just trying to write songs, I'm trying to buy a guitar that looks good and feels good.
yeah.
So what should a sales leader do? Sorry, I did a big tangent. What should a sales leader do is they should specifically hire to the point that's going to help them maximize the efficiency of what they're trying to sell,
Right.
right? So if they say to themselves, well, all my salespeople have to be experts because they need to be able to find the solutions because I've got no subject matter experts. Fine, you're right, because they are the subject matter expert. But before that, they need to know how to sell. And to sell is to find out what it is that you do.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right, and I mean, like as you were saying, I think your sales skills are going to be more important than and all this stuff you've talked about, over the weeks and years or whatever. Like their motivation, like why are they there, and all this stuff that impacts like the quality of a salesperson. Because the product training, I mean, unless it's insanely complicated, right? And then, like we said before, there's usually an engineering team or whatever there too. Most of the time product training is easy, right? Anybody can learn, an accounting software, what it does, right? You don't need to understand that. I don't know. I should have gone in the accounting world. I don't know anything about accounting, but you don't need to understand like the complexities, the ins and outs of accounting to be able to sell the software. What you need to understand is how your product solves like is a solution for certain pain points. So I completely agree. As a sales leader, I think the focus needs to be on improving sales skill, finding good salespeople, and improving sales skills. And yes, some product training because you don't want to send them out there without knowing anything. But it's relatively secondary, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think there are, Fab, there are some exceptions, and let's talk about a few exceptions. So
Of
let's
course.
say you're a pharmaceutical rep that's selling a very specific tool to a surgeon, right? So there's a new scalpel that's come out. Well, when you're going to go out there, you're not going to tell the surgeon, "Hey, man, what are your objectives?" It's like, no, you're selling me a better scalpel. Okay, so why do you need a better scalpel? Because you'll be able to operate, 10% more efficiently and you'll save 10% more lives. That's the objectives, right?
Yeah.
So maybe in that case, that surgeon is going to say, okay, tell me more about this scalpel. Why does it do that? And then you'll get into features and benefits. I understand that. But
Yeah.
generally, in most sales situations, when you're selling to a decision maker that is not a technician or whatnot, when you're selling to the company that's trying to achieve big objectives, you need to understand what the objectives are. And even with this doctor or surgeon, what's your objectives, Mr. Surgeon? My scalpel needs to be efficient, not kill my patients with infections, and of course I don't know about this stuff. But in if you can create efficiency because there's a few things that help, well, those are my objectives. Again, I don't really care about the super high grade steel. I care that high grade steel is going to help me do my job. So ultimately, you and I are saying the same thing: is that your salespeople need to have the skills to communicate with their potential decision maker who's going to make that jump to be able to communicate with them to understand their objectives, right?
Mm,
And once
yeah.
there, then if they need to be a subject matter expert because you have none back at the office, that's a secondary thing. But to say
Yeah.
I'm going to take a subject matter expert, turn them into a salesperson, if they have the qualities, great, but they need to be a salesperson, a representative first. And
Yeah.
that's what a lot of leaders get. They get sometimes a sales leader, the guy in charge of sales, talks to the president of the company who was a production guy, and he just wants their reps to go out and talk about the product.
Yeah.
you know, um,
Yeah, it's because sales leaders don't always realize that while they were selling and building their company, they were probably more consultative than they thought they were.
or they got
But
lucky. I was
or they
talking to
got
one guy
lucky.
yesterday who had a full monopoly. He was in a territory. It was a telecom company in parts of Quebec. So, you know, you got full monopoly. Everyone's going to buy from you. You don't even need to know sales. It's like,
Yeah,
here you go. Here's your license to operate in that area. Full monopoly. It's
yeah,
like, it's almost that, you run like a
yeah.
government.
But those are probably more the exceptions than the rules. But
Yes.
but you're right, and there are other exceptions, right? Like if you're maybe again, I don't know how law firms operate, but if you're a law firm or if you're a consulting firm, sometimes your salespeople will actually be the people executing the agreements as well. So obviously,
Yeah.
then they need to be experts because they have to know how to execute what they sell. But I think in most times when we're talking about like traditional sales, that we're thinking about like there's a sales leader with salespeople and they're selling a software or they're
Mhm.
selling some piece of equipment or stuff like that. Like the main core thing to look for is sales ability, and because product training is product training. You can train a product, you can train on new features, you can train on 2023 releases, you can train on all that's trainable. But the sales skills, I mean, sales skills are obviously also trainable. But if you're looking for a quicker ramp up, you want somebody who has more sales skills than product knowledge, because
Yep.
product knowledge is easy to ramp up on. And there's always somebody you can turn back to, right? There's always a product expert, there's always a developer, there's always a way to know what your product does. But understanding how sales works and how to be a better seller, if you want to ramp up quickly, I think that's where you need to focus
Well, they're
on.
very different skills, right? So,
Yeah.
so if you have the expertise skill, great. But if you don't have the desire and the intelligence to be able to communicate properly, well, you're going to have a hard time with that person being a salesperson. You know,
Yeah.
I was talking to one potential client just last week that wants to give a form of sales training to his experts because they're talking to the client and they're
Right.
and sometimes like, whoa, okay, we got to be careful in these conversations because he was telling me that sometimes it's borderline rude, right? So
Yeah,
so
and it can be, and that is the danger with sales with experts, right? Is that sometimes because they know so much, is they can come off as rude to people who don't. If you're talking to a buyer, let's say, or a CEO or a VP, and they're not in the weeds, and you're the expert, it can come off.
yeah,
And I've seen that, right? Where I've seen that, I've been in situations where I'm speaking with an expert, and it's like they're clearly beside the like they're clearly not salespeople, right?
yeah,
Um, okay, cool. So I
yeah. So how
think
do you operationalize this?
yeah, I think there's something that you mentioned in the show that I hadn't thought about previously, but uh, let's start with what we talked about, uh, what we planned out first. So first is a recruitment level. So even as a sales leader, you need to have a good recruitment process, and that's part of the operationalization. It might not all happen in the CRM, obviously, but you need to. And we talked about sales assessment a little while back, but
Yeah,
you need to make sure that you and your recruiters are looking for people with sales skills first and foremost and product knowledge second, right? I think that's on an operational level is that you need to make sure that you know what you're looking for,
yeah,
because especially if you have a recruitment team, they won't always know. They might assume that if we sell accounting software, we need accountants or people with accounting backgrounds. So I would work with the recruitment team to make sure, or a recruitment firm, whatever method you use to hire people, work with them to develop a good process to identify people with sales skills.
little parentheses there. When you're recruiting salespeople, you know, make sure that the people that are recruiting those salespeople understand what you're looking for, because
Yeah,
that's often the problem, right? That the problem often stems from there. They look, like you said, they're looking for experts and they don't know how to look for salespeople. Okay, close parentheses. Continue.
yeah. Um, so that would be kind of the pre. Obviously, during the tenure of your salesperson, what you want to do is really monitor your what's the word? Monitor your conversation intelligence tool. Monitor their calls. Listen to what they're saying, because you're going to have two things. Sometimes you're going to hire people that have product knowledge, right? Or you are going to train people on their product. So you want to make sure that you're listening at the call to make sure that they are not pushing the product, that it's not becoming this veil that you talked about before, that they are communicating and they are being consultative and all that stuff that we regularly talk about. And what I would also try to pay attention to is, as the tenure of the salesperson grows, i.e., they've been in the company for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years, you're going to want to make sure that you're paying closer and closer attention, because I find like the longer a salesperson stays at the company, they're obviously the more they're going to know about the product, right? Because they're going to see a whole bunch of different implementations. They're going to have spoken to a
Yeah.
lot of different people. They're going to have a lot of training over the years and stuff like that. And you want to make sure that the more product knowledge they get doesn't shift away from the selling. And so to me, on an operational level, when you're talking about product expertise, your conversation intelligence tool will be one of your biggest allies, because you want to make sure that their conversations stay sales conversations and not product pushing and stuff like that, because it can happen, right? Even if you're not hiring an expert, it can happen over time as they get to know the product, and so on and so forth.
What
um,
what often happens, just to add to that point, what
yeah,
often happens in that situation is a junior rep will have the natural tendency of asking all those questions,
yeah,
and as they get more product knowledge, they start dictating and pitching rather than listening, and that's where things fall apart. So
yeah.
good point.
And something you mentioned too is, like, obviously, as maybe you do hire somebody with expertise, or they're bringing in sales experts, or sales engineers, or whatnot. I would also monitor the pipeline. Or if, for example, the co-founder or the founder wants to be like, no, 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 we absolutely need accountants or people with accounting backgrounds selling this software. I would monitor pipeline and conversion rates as well, to look at how these different types of salespeople are are performing, right? So
Yeah.
as maybe you're going to be hiring sales people with more sales experience. Maybe once in a while you're going to find somebody who has previous product knowledge because they've been in the industry for X number of years. Monitoring their pipeline and their performance is going to be key, because you're going to want to see how well that's performing. And I was reading a book not too long ago, and some studies came out about salespeople that bring in sales engineers because there's some complexity, or or the IT team needs to talk to somebody or whatnot. And clearly the ones that still are maintain their sales expertise and just have the sales engineers speak like very short amounts of time during their, like, answering very specific questions about IPs and subdomains and all that stuff, and security and all that stuff, but not let them take over the call, are the ones that perform the best. So I would definitely also monitor the performance, like on the pipeline of people that have more or less product expertise, or people that are
Yep.
bringing in a lot of product experts on their calls, to see how
Yep.
that's performing. So those would
Absolutely.
be the three things: recruitment, conversational intelligence, and monitoring the pipeline if you do have different profiles of reps.
That's great. That's great. It's awesome. And I think, if you allow me to add something there, is that, the real, if you, let's say, to boil this down to, you've operationalized it, that's great. And if you boil it down to the sales leader who's thinking, man, I'm curious as to what I do. If you have an intelligent salesperson who is good at being a salesperson, a consultative salesperson, you most likely can teach them, or educate them on the level of technical and mechanical knowledge to assist them, rather than to have that impede them. And Fab, too often, and you and I both seen this, too often the expertise has impeded the sales process.
Mm-hmm.
Not because, and we're not saying that you don't need experts. Of course, you need experts to implement. But in the sales process, if you're throwing out the expertise too early, you're sort of you're blinding them with babble that is not interesting to them or not relevant to what you're trying to convince them of. And I'll give you, if I can give you another example, I get bombarded on LinkedIn with people trying to get me to make a better website or to have a better social media campaign. None of them ask me questions. None of them. They're like, hey, do you want to increase your this, your that? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Tell me more about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then boom, 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 and they don't follow up. They're all terrible salespeople, because if some of them took the time to say, well, what's the revenue of your company? What are you trying to achieve? They would probably say, hey, I'd think, oh wow, this person's actually taking time to talk to me, and a few of them
Yeah.
have over the years. And so I'm not being, what's going to first attract me is not their expertise. What's going to first attract me is the fact that they're listening to me.
Yeah.
So just by that very that 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 statement, that sentence, we come back to the fact that no, expertise is not the most important thing when hiring a salesperson. And
Right.
it's sales expertise. It's not technical expertise.
Right. Paul, we're gonna have to start ending it, and maybe we can end it on the top takeaways. And that's just because my headphones are gonna are gonna die
Oh
at
yes,
some
it's
point
true. I
soon.
forgot about that.
So do you have some takeaways? I have 3 takeaways, but do you have some takeaways that you'd like to share?
My takeaway is be cautious as a leader. That was a long takeaway I was just doing before. So be cautious as a leader, not to be blinded by the expertise trap. The expertise in the product trap, and try to go for sales first, because you're hiring a salesperson.
Hmm.
So that to me is the biggest takeaway, and I think it englobes all of them. What are your takeaways?
Yeah, along the same lines, I think something we talked about is, of course, they need to understand the product, right? Like they're not going to be completely green, but then the product knowledge has to be more about helping them disqualify their clients, right? If their clients are looking for social media management and their tool does email marketing, like clearly, they have to know that that's you won't be able to solve their pain point. Although while speaking to them, you might realize that email marketing is their main problem, but that's another story. So I think the product knowledge has to be more about helping them identify, qualify, or disqualify their clients. And so during the recruitment process, it's about picking people, especially if you want to ramp up your salespeople faster. It's about identifying people who have the sales skills, the communication skills required, less about the expertise. And then the last one is like operationalizing it. So make sure you have good conversational intelligence tool that allows you to listen into conversation and read the transcripts and identify if people are pushing products too much or talking about products too early or whatnot. And if you have different profiles, definitely monitoring your sales pipeline to look at the differences between the different pipelines. The different profiles. Sorry.
Great. Good stuff.
Cool. Paul, it's been fun.
Yes.
2022 has been interesting. A lot of changes, lots of ups and downs. Hopefully 2023 will be just as fun, podcast wise, obviously.
Yes. Yeah. And soon to come, we'll have, we're working on this. We're going to add how you guys can reach out to us and have a conversation with us if you want, because we haven't done that yet. So we're going to do that in the new year. You'll
That's
know
true.
how to reach Fab and I. Now, if you want to reach both of us, you could probably find us on our websites, but we're working on making that a little simpler for you guys.
Sounds good. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye, Paul.
Bye, everyone. Ciao, Fab.